Kaya Biz. Wealth creation on Kaya Biz.
Time to talk how we can make more money, right? And we're well aware of the fact that investing is one of the ways to do that. Allocating your capital to funds, to sectors, to spaces within our economy that do promise to generate a higher return. But in pursuit of a higher return, how is it that one does need to capitalize on some opportunities that have come to the fore? And this time around, we're going to talk about investing in energy ETFs, exchange-traded funds, which essentially is a basket of opportunities, companies, stocks, a wide variety of assets that you can actually invest in, sometimes even commodities, and you get the average performance of that particular basket that you've chosen to invest in. And today we will be taking a look at an opportunity to invest in energy ETFs or companies in the energy sector, largely based on what we've witnessed in the last few weeks. If you take a look at the Brent crude oil price, boy, has it been incredibly volatile and increased substantially in the last few months, primarily on the back of the conflict that's unfolding between Russia and the Ukraine. So, does this present an investment opportunity that we should be mindful of? Perhaps. And if so, we're going to take a look at the ins and outs that we should be evaluating. For that, my guest that joins us on the show this evening is Omega Shange, a data analyst by profession with 7 years of experience in finance and psychology. Interesting title, right? Omega, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope we have a productive conversation.
Oh,
and hello to everybody listening at home.
Indeed, definitely. I'm already intrigued by the interlink between finance and psychology because, man, oh man, I can imagine the amount of research that you have there. And maybe that also speaks and influences the current times that we're in, right? That as South Africans, as global investors, we always link, I guess, the like psychological mindset or environment that we're in, and it does have an impact on the financial decisions and outcomes that we pursue. Maybe let's start there before we take a look at investing in energy ETFs. Do we find that, in times of panic, uncertainty, that does influence the financial decisions that we do take?
Yeah, definitely, because the financial decisions that people make aren't, most of the time, the financial decisions that people make aren't based on logic, but are based on natural behavior. When we feel threatened, we'll make certain financial decisions. When we feel happy and confident, we'll make certain financial decisions. So it's quite important to understand the behavior of people when looking at, say, something like investing, because investing is, in fact, a behavioral activity more than it actually is solely a financial activity. People will invest based on how they feel about something. And so it's quite important to actually put finance and psychology together because behavior factors in how people make financial decisions. Wow.
When you said how people feel, it hit home because some of our personalities are more intuitive and we are feelers. So we need to beef up on the technical muscle, right? And maybe we should actually talk about how people are feeling about energy. If there's one thing I feel is a lot of pain when I pour a full tank of petrol in my car. And I can imagine how then investors also look at, gas opportunities or oil and energy opportunities. So if we could describe a feeling around that, what would it be?
I would say, obviously, a simple feeling that we can all relate to is frustration, right? So when you go put fuel in your car, you feel slightly frustrated. When you look at, say, something like load shedding, you feel frustrated every time the lights go on. That frustration is something that will make people behave in a particular way. So, for example, someone can be so frustrated that they decide to buy a solar system. You can see the decision of buying a solar system is not solely based on that they need a solar system for their house, but it's in fact how they feel every time the lights go off. And so that's how behavior actually affects, it's one of the ways behavior actually affects the financial decisions that we make. Our emotions can drive us to behave in a particular way. In relation to investing, obviously, most investors have a bit of better control of their emotions, so they wouldn't necessarily make investment decisions based on emotions. However, they would look at society and say because of how people feel about the energy situation right now, what decisions will they be making, such as what products and services will they want to switch to buy and use, and so thus which companies will benefit from, say, that frustration. So, for example, if you're an investor, you probably are going to be looking at solar producing companies, or companies that produce commodities and instruments that are utilized in the production of solar power. Why? Because, well, if people get frustrated enough people who can afford solar energy can decide to switch their homes, or in fact the whole entire country, when frustrated enough, not just by the energy situation, but maybe by the desire to sort of save the world from climate change disasters, people can actually make decisions, get into solar, and then if you're an investor in solar power, you can actually benefit from those emotions.
And maybe let's discuss that further, because it's an opportunity. Perhaps our emotions might be directing us greatly in terms of frustration, but also spotting the opportunity. But I guess there's a great amount of confusion in the market, right? Because when one considers investing in energy companies, we think of the usual oil-producing stocks and companies we've Shell, BP, Sasol locally, just to name a few. But I understand the universe around energy is so much broader than that. Where do we start?
Very broad.
Yeah. I guess take us through that universe to actually unpack the myriad of options that do exist. Omega, are you there? Omega, are you there? Okay, seems as though we might have lost Omega slightly due to some technical difficulties, or maybe it's the weather, maybe it's the network, maybe it's even load shedding happening somewhere. Or Masego, who stepped into the producer's booth and might have disrupted connectivity there, behind the scenes stuff that's happening. But as Omega mentioned, he's joining us this evening to give us insight as to how to invest in the myriad of energy ETFs that are available and that present an opportunity, largely based on what we've seen given the volatility in the oil price and the sharp increases that have occurred. But energy is so much broader than that. It's not just about the petroleum companies and oil companies that we might be familiar with, but there's also solar companies. There's those that play within the alternative energy space as well, generating various forms of energy, and even businesses, right? I know a few South Africans who have gotten solar panels, inverters, and alternative sources of power to keep the lights on, given the time and the period that we live in. And all of that does contribute to an opportunity that we should be mindful of. So do stay with us, and if you have any questions, you can also dial in 086 0000959. You can also tweet us at Kaya On Air. Use the hashtag KayaBiz, and of course tweet me at Gukumfupi if you have any questions around investment opportunities in energy ETFs. Well, we've got Omega back on the line now, and I'm hoping that the line does hold up, Omega. Seems as though we lost you there slightly, but where we were was trying to get some perspective on just how broad the energy universe really is. And we touched on a few petroleum companies, but the truth is there's so many other options that we need to evaluate. Talk us through some of them.
Yeah, the energy sector is actually quite broad. Before I speak about how broad the energy sector is, I'd like to first bring up the question of energy. It's very simple. We use energy to power our homes, our businesses, and the technology that we use. The human population keeps growing year after year, meaning there's more demand for energy. At the same time, we also don't want to hurt the planet. So that's the energy landscape that we're in. And because of that landscape, the energy sector, the energy sector itself has become quite broad, from renewable power to traditional fossil fuel energy, such as oil, gas, and coal. We now have obviously wind, solar, hydroelectric, and then of course nuclear is sort of an old energy source, but it also falls under renewables. And of course then there's battery as well. That's also a sector that's actually developing battery power for homes, cars, and all other things.
Lithium,
and all those. Yeah, and lithium as well. Obviously, lithium is a commodity that's quite in demand when it comes to battery power. And all those things are actually trying to solve the same problem, which is how do we power the world without actually hurting ourselves and the planet? And so there's various solutions that are being developed right now within the energy space. Of course, legally and politically, countries do want to move away from fossil fuel energy. So you look at, say, the situation in Europe right now. A lot of countries are being inspired to try fast-track moving away from fossil fuel energy in order to obtain renewable power. And so that's obviously creating a lot of other businesses in its place. So you can imagine there's the commodity producer who obviously produces the raw material used to produce energy. But on top of that, there's also the person who creates tools that are used to actually dig up the raw commodity. So there's a whole chain of businesses that are actually involved within energy production before you get to, say, the power utility companies that actually now send the energy to our businesses and our homes. So the space is actually broad, and ETFs obviously offer us a very big opportunity to actually enter different parts of the energy sector based on obviously the predictions that we make about the future.
Very true. I'm glad you've highlighted that because it really broadens our horizon in terms of understanding where to start, what opportunities exist, and of course, understanding how this asset class might perform over the short to medium term, given the volatility and news flow from Russia and Ukraine, but also being cognizant of the long-term inputs, as you see, many countries and companies looking to be energy efficient and green and being more sustainable. On that note, Omega, the big question that many of us will ask is, okay, then where do I start? I've Googled energy ETFs and it seems as though there's a plethora of ETFs.
There's a lot of them.
True. So where do we start? How much should we consider? What are the underlying factors that we should be mindful of when it comes to investing in energy-specific ETFs and understanding the criteria behind it?
All right. So right now, obviously, the energy sector is benefiting quite a lot from the uncertainty in the global environment. Obviously, this uncertainty at some point will obviously end and the world will move on. So the way I look at investing in energy is in two ways. One, it's for short-term investments, and secondly, it's for the long term. So already we've mentioned long-term, you want to be in renewable energy. So what I'd actually first start looking at is the simple question of which countries will adopt renewable energy the fastest. So that's for my renewable energy line. All right. And from asking myself that question, I'll then decide to invest in particular ETFs that have a focus on those particular countries. So, for example, I might invest in an ETF like Energy Select SPDR, which obviously has a focus in the North American market. And I predict that North America and Europe will be one of the first places to actually adopt renewable energy. Whilst for now, in the case of, let's say, the rest of the world, I might look at, say, short-term investments that hold coal, oil, and gas investments, simply because those ETFs will be benefiting quite a lot from the current global environment. So the first place to start is to ask yourself, where will energy, this particular type of energy, be adopted in, whether it's renewable or current traditional energy? And then look at the country, and then obviously understand the risk involved. The main risk will be production, right? Will the raw materials to produce that type of energy actually exist, right? So if you're looking at something like renewable energy, lithium, that's a factor. Can we get lithium out the ground fast enough in order for us to use it as a reliable power source? If you look at, say, something like solar, then you obviously have to look at, say, something like geology and obviously geography as well to understand, well, what is the meteorological behavior of solar power within a particular region? Not every country can use solar because, well, the sun doesn't shine the same way in every country. And at the same time, not every country can use wind. And so you have to sort of analyze countries as well to understand what are the renewable energy sources that they are most likely to adopt because of their own geography. So, for example, in South Africa, because we're in Africa, and at the bottom of Africa, we might adopt, say, solar a lot easier than, say, a country that's in South America, right? Simply because of our geography. At the same time, though, we will also have a financial hindrance in the sense that we might not be able to afford solar the same way we have been able to afford coal. And so there's also looking at the finances of countries, looking at the finances of the consumers in those countries to sort of assess, will this type of energy be the most successful in this particular region? But overall, the lovely thing about ETFs is that most of them are quite diversified geographically. So the geographical risk sort of gets limited and quite balanced. And so you can invest in quite a few ETFs as long as you diversify among the type of energy. So have a wind-based ETF, have a solar-based ETF, have an oil and gas-based ETF. All right, that's where you are in each type of energy. in the foreseeable future, so for the next 10, 20, or 30 years, we're not just going to do away with fossil fuels. I know everybody would like that to be the case, but it's just not going to happen. It's going to happen very, very slowly. So what's going to be happening is there's going to be a diverse energy mix of different types of energies competing for the main energy source of a particular region. And you'll find that over time, there'll be a lot of changes in the different types of energies that are used. So it's a good idea to be diversified by the types of energies and also by the type of geographies involved.
Oh, Omega, this is definitely a conversation we're going to follow up on in the next few months, and I guess also review the performance of some of these ETFs. But valid points that you've mentioned. Evaluate the country, what kind of energy will be adopted first, reviewing both opportunities in new energy and alternative energy, but also looking at some of the fossil fuels which continue to be relevant and remain important in certain parts of the world, because ultimately having a diversified approach is what will keep us quite competitive in terms of our returns as investors. Thank you so much, Omega. Really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. That's our guest this evening, data analyst as well as investor, giving us some feedback on investment opportunities in energy ETFs. Omega Shange, giving us a lot to consider when it comes to investing in energy. Very broad, very wide, and these are the themes that you do need to consider when it comes to investment opportunities.
Kaya Biz with Gugulethu Mfuphi, Monday to Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. on Kaya 959.
On the street, on the air.